Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're on across this great world of ours. Today, I'm going to continue this thing on Bureau of Indian Affairs. I really feel that there's a calling or a need for this or this restructuring of the BIA. Yesterday, it snowed here in Cincinnati, but I was trying to update some paperwork that I needed to get caught up on. And I was looking on stuff on X, and I belong to a couple pages of people that are Native American. And even with me being my great grandmother was a Seminole, and she was part of the Dawes Act that went from Florida up to eastern parts of Indiana, and married my great grandfather Fred Baker. So I'm what is part of what I call the Baker clan. But the goal here, what I want to talk about, is when we talk about this BIA or Bureau of Indian Affairs, and from this point on in this discussion or in this conversation, I'm going to call it the BIA. The BIA, even though it was established as part of the Interior Department, we have to remember back in the 19th century, especially like 1834s, that once that we had the Trails of Tears in the 1830s, and we can even go back to the 16, 1700s with King Philip's War, where when the English came over, what they did is part of their philosophy, and this is because what they did to Ireland is they dehumanized people or different people, so like Irish, and this even continued up in the 1960s when we can talk about when JFK ran for president and he was a Catholic, though there was this reluctance and this misunderstanding of Catholics. And even though I'm a Catholic itself, there's always this misrepresentation that they see Catholicism because we have Mary statues and other statues that they see this as a cult. Same thing goes with LDS, which is Latter-day Saints, often seen as a cult. But really, when you study both like LDS and Roman Catholicism, both of them are very similar in both ways. That you have to be into that inner circle to be able to achieve or to have this recognition. The same thing holds true on American reservations, is that it's a unique clan or a unique, I don't want to call it a clique, but it's a unique specimen because these are people that are mistreated, misguided, used by the federal government for their own means. In other words, westward expansion, moving them off lands by Jackson, Grant pushing people off of reservations of West when they find gold in the Black Hills. Case in point, we have the issue with the Dakotas now with the fracking that goes on, and water is life to a lot of these tribes. And when you go in and frack, especially in North Dakota and the pipeline, then you create problems because really, as an outsider, you can't see or understand that, and not unless you're in that inner circle. Case in point, though I'm not in that inner circle, I've interviewed quite a few people, and quite a few of them are my friends, but there's this mistrust and misunderstanding by the federal government for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries that we put people in this Bureau of Indian Affairs, and really most Native Americans and I'm not talking leaders. I'm sure there's somewhat of acceptance of the BIA by leaders on these tribes. But for the majority of people, there's a mistrust in government, and part of the government is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So this becomes the foundation of mistrust and misunderstanding of people, because when we see this and they've had all these problems with the government, so what do we do as the government? We put them under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and hopefully they will succumb to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And really, I always think of this, and it's like, this is not really a system of, it's almost a Dawes Act or reform, due to the fact that we have this, Bureau of Indian Affairs. And like I said, I firmly believe this is a system that's obsolete. I know we were talking about this going back to FDR and Harold Ickes. And I've read some things about Harold Ickes and also FDR, how they wanted to transform the Indian Bureau, but they got a lot of resistance, especially from white leadership in the Congress in this time period, from Western interest. And we got to remember, even though the Bureau, and my contention is another contention, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is located, the main office is in Washington, D.C., but yet, majority of your reservations are west of the Mississippi, which to me is another fathom that can't comprehend, because really, how are they helping most of the reservations west? And granted, I'm sure they're helping, but I think the system is probably, if you look deep into it, there's a lot of duplication of effort, a lot of administrative cost, and this doesn't really help the tribes themselves, like with the issues on water quality, social issues, health issues. And we can basically look at the COVID situation, where a lot of these tribes hungered down and they had a higher death rate compared to the average norm, because the fact sanitation and hygiene was not really important, because the fact that even though they were taught to it, they were, the people would succumb to this. And there again, this becomes an issue with low intelligence, not low intelligence, but low education, low poor or low social strife, and etc. So in essence, we've created this Bureau of Indian Affairs, and even though things have got better, they should be a lot better than what they are, and they're not. And there's a lot of this status quo, and I'm a big believer. And then the second point on this is, you put the government into charge of something, they'll mess it up all the time. Case in point, I see that in the government, because I am trying to work on creating coaching and mentorship programs, self-esteem motivation, as well as NLP and hypnosis. And the government drags their feet on things, because there's things that I need to do, and that there's always this issue of the government takes their time on getting things. And I understand that. That's part because it's just a lot of administrative. And there again, I think the issue becomes, in any organization, there's high administrative cost, and not necessarily a big issue. Kirkpatrick's book, Dr. Kirkpatrick's book on organizations that are top heavy, and one of the top heavy organizations I would have totally agree with would be the BIA and a lot of the government programs, because the issue becomes, we're not addressing the issues with Native American culture. Another case in point, I reached out to the Senate and the subcommittee about just my concern about things, and that happened maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks ago, and yet have not heard from anybody. And I don't expect to hear from anybody. I didn't ask them to return my call. But the point is that as a government, if you can't address these issues, then you're not winning. Case in point also is the county. I reached out to them from some things, turned some paperwork in on Monday. Then they sent me a letter on Wednesday that we hadn't received your paperwork, and yet they had. They sent it out Monday, even though I turned it in Monday. So there again, like I said, there's always this law that exists with the government. And there's, like I said, when we're talking about the Bureau, and my emphasis here is there's a mistrust with the common native people. Even the leadership may agree with this. And many of these have the casinos, which becomes another issue now, because I've got a book, Casinos and Diminishing Revenue for Tribes, which this issue has not been addressed and needs to be addressed. And yet the BIA has not addressed this issue. And the issue became very apparent during COVID when a lot of these native casinos who count on social and infrastructure programs, the casinos were shut down. Well, they lost a lot of money and they'll never get that money back. And at that point, online gambling came into being. And my guess is a lot of them lost money on that. And you have to take into account further generations, such as Gen Zs, have no interest, or millennials have no interest in the gambling itself. So when the boomers, Gen X, pretty well die out, there's a possibility, a high possibility, in my opinion, that a lot of these casinos will be sitting vacant, like we see right now with the malls in many cities, because the malls, there was not a retroactive issue about what we do with the malls. So as we see a lot of malls, a lot of places like Kmart, Sears no longer exist because they were not attuned to what was happening to culture. Same thing I believe is going to happen with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're not staying current, and they will become stagnant, and they won't be helping people. So just some food for thought. So please like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at bthomasmillerpsych@gmail.com. bthomasmiller@gmail.com. Anyway, thanks, folks, and hope to talk to you real soon. Have a great day. Bye.